Okay, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Line Your Own Pockets. I'm super excited with this one today because when Dave sent me the kind of article he wrote about this way back in the day, it was like one of the first that I remember reading from him and getting super interested from his blog there. So we're going to talk about what do you do if you don't have the amount of time that you think you need for trading? And I say think you need because I think we're both going to agree and we're going to talk about how the amount of time that people think they need to trade isn't the amount of time that people actually need to trade. Um, but Dave, you were talking about, this is a question that you got all the time. So why don't you hop into it? Tell me what people are asking and what you're answering with.
Yeah, so when people sign up to my newsletter, in the welcome message they get, there's a question there like, "What's the biggest obstacle to your trading right now?" And I ask them to reply, and I always look at these and reply to them and see if I can help. But probably one of the most common obstacles people think they have is they have limited time for trading. They have a full time job. They want to do this on the side, and that man, if they just had more time, they could make it work. And it reminds me so much of when I felt the exact same way. Back when I was getting started, I was working full time for AT&T, and my daughter had just been born. I was just started working from home, and a full-time job is a full-time job. There's a lot of commitments.
Hmm.
You don't have the luxury of watching the markets all day. So I had the exact same feeling that a lot of traders that come to me now have. I wish I had more time, but with hindsight, thinking back on that period, I know that that was actually an advantage for me. I know it sounds crazy, it sounds counterintuitive, but it was no question it was an advantage to me to have limited time. So we can go into that further, and we will the rest of this episode. But
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think, Michael?
I think it's a lot of the same way, and we've already talked about in some of the podcasts some of the things you could already do, right? The advanced order types, the that kind of thing. But I've heard a lot of the same thing, and I don't know. I don't want to say excuse, but I don't know if it's an excuse that people are kind of putting up in their heads for why they can't do something. Because I just thought about the question that you asked people. It's like, hey, what's your limiting thing? And immediately I thought if you were a personal training website or like a weight loss website or learning a second language or whatever it is, I think there would be the same answer, right? I think it's something that just a lot of people say is that and I don't know if it's a kind of a barrier they have in their head where they think they don't know how much time they have to allocate to certain things, or if it's just that fear of getting started, which I think is a big thing for a lot of people. Once you dive into a project, I think it becomes a lot easier to kind of to get started. Like even go back. I was going to say go back to high school, but we can go back to college. There's so much gray in my beard that's still a long time ago. And you have to write an essay or do a project. It's always the first part of it that gets started. As soon as you're in there, I think you realize someone says, "Oh, you got to write 10,000 words or whatever." And you look at that number and you say, "Oh, that's a massive deal." But once you part it out and you start going through processes step by step, I think it becomes a little bit easier. You realize that you don't need as much as you initially thought. And I think it's probably the same with trading. They look at the end goal and maybe they look at some of the things that they see on social media with, this guy's got 34 screens open and he's watching all these things and he's got a news squawk and all of this. So I don't know if it's a bit of just not understanding exactly what's going to be involved when you get started, and then a little bit, I think, of that fear of just going with it. Do you agree? Do you think that most people are, I, to summarize, I think most people are dramatically overestimating what it is they have to do. And because they don't know how to get from A to Z, they don't realize that they can break all of those parts up into individual processes and individual parts. You don't have to learn to become a full-time trader right off the bat. There's like 1,000 steps you can take between where you are now and kind of that final goal.
Yeah, I think it's true. It's a little bit of a crutch, I could tell for some people. Um, but it reminds me of how when you meet people, sometimes you have there's some small talk, and you say, how are you doing? And sometimes the answer is, "Oh man, I'm so busy." Like that's sort of the
Hmm.
default answer. Sometimes it's kind of annoying, and um, I can tell you can tell it's just they haven't really thought that much about it. So I think that there's a little bit of that here in this answer. But let me go into why I firmly believe that this was an advantage for me to have limited time, and let me
Sure.
tell you how I addressed it. So, I had worked for AT&T. I had conference calls all day, meetings, to answer to my boss whenever he rang. So I was basically forced to create a system for trading. I didn't have the luxury of just watching the market and having some discretion, thinking about things,
Hmm.
deciding whether to take trades or not. My trading day had to be very, very systematic. I had to have a plan. I didn't have the luxury. I didn't have time to not have a plan. And that
Yeah.
sounds kind of weird. Um, so I had to have a system. There's just no other way about it. Um, so that it kind of forced me to do that. The other thing was, how many times do you hear traders say that they overtrade? Sometimes they overtrade.
And
A lot.
yeah, not only will I say traders say that, that to me was probably the main reason. We can probably talk about this another podcast too. That's probably my main. If I had to pick one reason to become systematic, that was it. Is because I was one of those that saw, see shapes and clouds, right? I look at something enough, and I'll talk myself into trading it. Yeah, so I'd say everybody. I'd say if you're not, if there wasn't a point in your life where you were over trading, I think that you should. You're probably lying to yourself, right?
Yeah. So this, to your point about clouds, having limited time, I couldn't even look at the clouds to see if there were any shapes, right?
Hmm.
So I didn't have the chance to overtrade. I was only looking at so what I did is I carved out 30 minutes for myself to trade a strategy that would start trading right at the open, finish trading at 10 o'clock. So I had 30 minutes where I could look at the market and take signals. Um,
So sorry, do you
so
when you say finish trading, do you mean close positions, or do you mean, you've
no,
entered the orders, the stops out, and you would just leave it till the end of the day and move on with your
I
day?
would I would only enter orders between that period, and then I had all my exit orders in. I didn't have to look at the market the rest of the day. There was no temptation to exit early or take a partial when I didn't think I should.
Hmm.
All my orders were in, and they would just if I got sidetracked in a project at work, I couldn't look at the market at all, then my trades just executed automatically without my intervention at all. So it was just an absolutely a huge advantage to have these constraints because I didn't like I said, I didn't have the luxury of making a lot of the mistakes that I see traders make now.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I did a lot of trading while I was working the hedge fund game and did a lot of that as well. And for me, it was a little bit different because what I was doing was financial related. So I could always justify to anyone working in an office, having charts up, having a Bloomberg terminal going. But it was the same thing. You had a lot of things to do. So what for me, it ended up being more of a swing trader and less of a day trader. It was alert setting, right? That was the main thing. I'd actually go into the company Bloomberg terminal. I hope no one's listening, and actually set those alerts. And this was, 10 years plus ago. So having alerts that would actually text your phone and everything was a big deal. Like we're talking almost pre-iPhone at this time. So that was my process. I'd actually show up to work early every day, having done all my research at night, and set all these alerts, and then go about my day. But that was part of it as well. And just the comment I made about over trading, I think I talked about this earlier as well, where what was happening a lot for me, just journaling, not even the trades, just journaling the P&L at the end of the day and then journaling my life. I found that when I did absolutely nothing except trade it when those alerts took place and then left, that was way better than, days that I would try to work from home to, maybe slack a little bit at work and take more trades. So I think that was kind of the first step to me to becoming systematic. So it's a lot of the same thing. And we're talking about this, me and you, and again with the whole gray in the beard joke, is we're going way back. The amount of technology that didn't exist back then that does now, to help people out, plus the more and more people working from home, um, I I'm I'm gonna say, and I think you're gonna agree, it is way easier nowadays to do a lot of this stuff than it was before. Just simple apps like TradingView that will just, like, I'm wearing an Apple Watch. It will send an alert to my Apple Watch and say, hey, the price of this stock that you're interested in is hit. When you have time, you can open up your Robinhood account on your phone. Like, we didn't have any of these. You had to be, sitting there with a full desktop application, or it was no good.
Yeah. Um, Back when I went and started working from home, it was back when that was highly unusual. I mean, this was 2001. So it was
Yeah.
weird. And I knew that it was weird for at a big company to be able to work from home. So, I mean, think about it. If that's a weird situation, you really want to make sure that you're doing a great job at work
Hmm.
and that you're not spending, all day trading. So this was a way for me to carve out time to do what I wanted to do, but also be very visible at work and know, deep down that I was doing a great job at both places. And there was no question that I was, you know, working from home, slacking off or anything. And I knew that. And this was the system that I had, created for myself to be able to do that in this situation and live with it.
Oh, it's
Um,
funny, the stat you gave of you took that 30 minutes. I'm sure you've read some of the stats online on how many people in an office somewhere right now are on Facebook or Twitter, or something like that. It ends up, I've read stats of, like, up to 40% of people's day is just doing whatever. So you being, mindful of, this is the time to trade, and then this is the time to do the other thing, and I'm just going to hard separate those two. Again, yeah, probably made you a way better both employee and a way better trader, because the people who are even trading and then at the same time scrolling Facebook or scrolling Twitter, or something. Yeah, I think there's just a kind of lesson in mindfulness there, that if you block off, this is the time for this and this is the time for that, and I'm not going to let those two worlds collide at all, that's going to be a better thing. Now, for your 30 minutes, that couldn't have been all of your time, right? Because there are review and, research and all of that. So would that be at a different time, later in the day, end of the day, that kind of weekends, or?
sure. Well, that's a great point because most people when they think of trading, they think you're doing all this stuff during the day. But
Yep.
that's not the case. Like you don't have to set up your day like that. In fact, you shouldn't. You should be doing all your work outside of hours where you have a lot more flexibility in your schedule. If you have a job, certainly.
Hmm.
And um, the you can really plan out your trading day and devote exactly the time you need to it. So, of course, after hours, I was doing a lot of research. I knew the system that I was trading would work well over a large number of trades. So I did all the work required to get to that point to have confidence to be able to devote a small amount of time during the day because I knew at the time that these trades would play out, and it didn't in a way that didn't require my constant attention and constant babysitting. And yeah, of course, then at the end of the day, I could do a trading review, and I over time you'll get to where you can do that very quickly. You can do all the important steps, skip all the unimportant steps,
Yep.
and get that to be a very efficient process. I mean, what we're really talking about here is uh, becoming ruthlessly efficient with what you do. And that's the way good traders operate. They think about what they're doing and then become ruthlessly efficient at um, finding trades that they're missing that they can incorporate it into their system. finding trades that they're not taking that they can incorporate into a new system.
Yeah.
They're ruthlessly efficient about doing that. And uh, yeah, that's how I set up my trading day then. And yeah, it's like I said, it was very much an advantage.
And the same for me, and I have, like you do now, the flexibility to, if I wanted to sit and stare at things tick up and down, but just learned a long time ago that's not the move. So it's the same thing, right? I have two very young kids. Uh, so it's put them to bed around 7 or so my time, and then that's when I get to work, going through all of the charts again, as a swing trader, setting in all of my alerts and everything that day. So I imagine someone, like me, say you worked a full-time job and then you um, come home and hang out with your kids and your family and do all that, and they go to bed. And for me, it's probably the whole process going through, as someone who still goes through and looks at all these charts and does macro analysis and all of that. I'm still probably only an hour and a half to go through the entire market, to record what my systems did that day, to place alerts and orders and everything for the next day. And then I dedicate time to on the weekend for content absorption, right? So I actually have time booked to say, go read this new interesting Substack that you've taken a note of, or go watch this webinar that's interesting about that. And yeah, I think it's very much a lot of this stuff. And it's funny, they always say, if you want to learn about yourself, start trading, because it's going to show a mirror. um, a lot of this stuff you could apply to any other aspect of life. The amount of times I go to the gym and I see somebody at the gym who's also on their phone, texting someone the whole time, or even things
Yeah,
like they're playing with their kids, and they're doing something else as well. What we're talking about for trading, I think, could apply to a lot of things. Is you schedule at a time and you book at a time. You say, this is the time I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then forget it. And I'm going to say this. I imagine doing this podcast. We're hopefully going to be doing it for a very long time, and probably going to say this a million times. If I could have all the hours back I spent staring at charts live, tick up and down, um, you know, I'd be able to live like a second life if I had all that. I
yeah,
spent so much time just mesmerized by, right, 1 minute candles and up and down, up and down, up and down. And yeah, so definitely, if you find yourself doing that, then you know that whatever time you're spending is just not spent in the right location. It's kind of like
yeah,
those screen time apps you can have that tell you what you're doing, right? Make a journal is kind of my suggestion. How much time did you spend actually staring at a 1 minute chart of whatever trade that you were already in? You had a stop loss, you had a profit target, you had a time stop, you're in. Just how much time do you spend staring at that for no reason, right?
yeah. Yeah, what's the value you add there by watching that chart? You may think you do or convince yourself that you have some value to add there, but you probably don't. Um, so as you're talking, that reminded me of here's a good thought exercise for somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of time for trading, and maybe people that do have a lot of time to trade and live and breathe the markets and spend a lot of time during their day. Um, so think about how much time you spend during the day on your trading. And now imagine you had to cut that by 75%. What would you cut?
Mm,
Think about what would think if you had to do that, if you were forced to for whatever reason, what would you cut out? What would be the most valuable things you could do in your routine that would remain? And yeah, I think that's a really good exercise because you could probably cut out there's probably some things that come to mind that um are kind of fluff in your routine
yeah.
that this thought exercise can help you identify. But it's really good because it really forces you to figure out, okay, what is the value that I add to my trading each day? Like, what is the most valuable thing? What's the least valuable thing? And once you start thinking about it in that way, you can streamline your routine, arrange your routine where you're doing more of the most valuable things and less of the fluff. It's a really good way to think about how you structure your day and the time you dedicate to trading.
Well, I'd also say, I've It's kind of controversial, but I also say embrace laziness, right? There's that old, was it Bill Gates quote that he liked to hire lazy people because you gave them something to do, they're going to find the most efficient path with the least amount of BS to get it done. And if he hired a hard worker, it would take him the same amount of time, but he would just grind at that thing until it was done. So I think there's a bit of that. I've in trading, it's kind of different for the rest of life in general, based off the sole fact that most other things, the harder you push, the better the thing is, right? You go to the gym, the more hours you put in the gym, the harder you push to a degree is better. At the corporate life, it's generally better to be there before the boss shows up and leave after, and make sure you're, showing everyone how hard you're working. But in trading, it's not really that. You can't push the button harder and make more money. It is the work is involved in the testing and coming up with new ideas and all of that. And then the actual art of trading should be very effortless. It should be, very low emotion. It should be, very low time. But I think it's the old world and the new world where people have problems. I've talked to and kind of mentored people sometimes who are like lawyers or, business people, and they have this kind of type A personality, especially salespeople, where, right, with sales, it's how many people can I contact? That's how much money I'm going to make. Where in trading, it's just more of this Zen. I built the system. I now just have to follow it faithfully, and I have to let that work out. And that should be a very, very Zen like thing. You shouldn't be showing up ready to fight or anything. It's just I'm going to hit the buttons when the system tells me to hit the buttons, and then I'm going to go do something else and try to think of a new system or refinements to my current one.
Yeah, I agree. And as you were talking, it reminds me of um, a concept from running, from competitive running. So my wife she was in the Olympics for the U.S. a long
Wow.
time ago.
I didn't know that.
Um, yeah, so she coached herself. So and we've coached high school teams. So we're into running. We're into the philosophy of running and competitive running. And there's a term there. It's called hard easy. Most people think of running. You're out there running hard as you can every day, right? Well, that is a quick road to nowhere.
Yeah, you'll break something real quick.
So you really have to plan the hard days, and you can't do that every day. You can do it maybe 3 times a week at most if you're in, the prime of your life. So the times in between those are just easy days. You're just out running sort of mindlessly with friends. The purpose of it is to run easy, to be quote unquote lazy, to not go all out. And that's an important part of running is making time for those easy days, making time for those days off so that every day, every step, you're not, fighting a fire and, going all out. And then I think the same's true with trading. You have to allocate time, put yourself in a position where you're just watching, noticing the market, but there's no, there needs to be times where you're not going as hard as you can trying to come up with a new system or
Yeah.
testing something. You need to put yourself in a position where you're just noticing and mulling. It's important.
Yeah. Time for deep thinking, I think, is probably one of the least, emphasized thing of a lot of what most people do, right? It's the whole thing that we talked about this before. You get your best ideas when you're away from the office, but I think scheduling time for that, is very important. I actually have a thinking spot in the woods, right? I live in the woods. I've got a little camp chair that I've carried all the way out there. It's by a river, and it's far enough away from anything that there's no Wi-Fi or whatever, and that's my thinking spot. And I book time to. Sometimes I'll bring the iPad with preloaded things to look at, or things to read or something, but it purely devoted time to, okay, it's time to just think, just don't do anything else, but just kind of, and for me, when I have the times to do that, that's where a lot of my best work comes from. But if anyone looks like, if you were doing a corporate job and you just tell your boss, I'm just going to go sit in the woods for an hour and a half and think about stuff, that would be perceived as probably being lazy. You should be doing something, you should be working. I would argue that for most jobs nowadays, that would be beneficial as well. But it's this perception that if I'm not physically doing something, I'm not hitting a button, I'm not staring at a chart, I'm not doing something, that I'm being lazy. But yeah, it is dedicating time, I think, is probably the main theme here, is that you have to block off your time. Like the calendar app on my computer and my phone is probably the best thing that I have, because it tells me what I should be doing at any given time. And I think that's a good way to guide yourself as well, is actually go into your calendar and book, this is the time for trading, this is the time for work, this is the time for family, and this is the time for research and idea generation, everything like that. And as soon as you do that, I think you notice that those you get way more done in those times, because you're not multitasking, which is just horrible for the human brain. We're just really, really
Yeah.
awful at it.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, so Michael, I want to see a video of your thinking
Think it's
place.
spot, I
Take
will.
take your phone out there and take a video. I want to see these trickling waters that you're where all these
I'll
ideas are coming from.
Yeah, I'll send yeah, I'll probably upload it when I upload this video.
Yeah,
We'll
put it on
we'll
the
put it
show
on
notes.
show notes or Twitter. But yeah, it's very nice. It's beauty is, I've got my woods, and then the buddy next to me was actually the best man at my wedding. So between the two of us, we've got a massive spot. And yeah, sometimes I go out there and he's sitting there. And I don't know if he's thinking, or I don't, he's got two young kids too. I don't know if he's thinking or if he's just decompressing a little bit and saying I need a
Yeah.
little bit of time. But yeah, I definitely think you need that. And I got that from reading about people like Steve Jobs, who famously would just go to the zoo all the time. He'd leave all of his stuff behind and he'd go to, I think, San Diego. I My geography is bad. Wherever their headquarters were, there was a zoo nearby, and he would just go purposely get lost, because he was like, no one recognizes me here, and I can just walk around and figure stuff out. And there's a lot of stories of writers locking themselves up in cabins where no one could get a hold of them, and all of that. But can't go that far. But I can go in the woods for an hour, and when everyone's busy and no one notices. And yeah, so find that yourself. And my encouragement would be, if you think you don't have enough time, you do. Just understand that your goal is not to get all the way to the end goal right away, right? If you have half an hour a day, that's fine. You just have to dedicate that half hour a day to something, right? Maybe you even have less time than Dave, and you want to simply put out, you want to do all of your research, and you want to set all your orders during that half hour, and then leave for the day and let those things happen. Because again, you have more automation tools now that you did before. And I think that would be a good thing to go over, Dave, as well. Is that, how much do you think from when you started to where you are now, or to where the people are, that leap in technology can save that time? So take your same situation where you were working for AT&T and everything, and you're working from home, you're trying to do a good job, but just transport that instead of 2001 to now. How much more efficient do you think you could be with that half hour?
A lot more. I mean, a lot of what came out of that time was tools for my trading that would automate more and more of that half hour. So now, like if I was doing it now, I would have Brokerage Plus, and Brokerage Plus came directly out of that time period for me and what I needed. So I went through probably, I bet, 5 different applications that I created for myself to enter my orders in various stages of automation that finally culminated in broke what you see now in Brokerage Plus.
Hmm.
So, um, so a lot of what the difference was is stuff that I've created and put into Great Ideas in Brokerage Plus, and it was solely to make my life better and to make my life more efficient during that time.
Yeah. So that would be kind of one of the, I think, leave the people with, is that you have enough time. Even what I would do is, if you're saying, hey, I want to start trading, I want to start systematic trading, I don't think I have enough time. The first couple weeks of these half hour increments that you're going to find for yourself should be just researching the technology, right? Just looking for what are my goals? What am I looking to do? And what piece of technology can I lean on? If you're someone who's like, I want to get really into investing and I want to do longer term things like that, well, there's probably research reports you could subscribe to, and there's probably, you know, alerts you could set. There's orders. We have that whole episode, 2 episodes, I think, on order types that you could put out. So a lot of that could be done. If it's day trading, then yeah, things like Brokerage Plus, where you can just have the system trade for you as long as it's connected. Your sole job there is either to input the names that you want traded or to fully automate it with systems, however that is. But I think that that exercise of researching the tools that are out there will help with everything else, because you'll understand that, oh, there's a lot that technology can do, and the amount of time and energy that I need around this full-time job or whatever it is that's taking up all of your time, eh, I can create that flexibility because I don't need to be there necessarily even when the market opens or closes anymore. I can just have the systems do all that for me.
Yeah, and I bet that once you start looking at your actual time spent during the day, not only will you be able to automate some steps, but some steps you'll be able to completely eliminate. So if you
Yeah.
look at that with a really, critical eye, you'll get creative and figure out how to do what you're doing with a lot less time and a lot less effort for sure.
Yeah. And journal it. Take 2 days and Apple Notes or a piece of paper, whatever it is, and just write half-hour blocks. What did you spend doing all of these times? And you'll notice there'll be at least a couple in there that are just useless, right? And then you could say, okay, I can now take those and I can move something useful in there, and then all of a sudden I'm walking down the road. So
Yeah.
uh, another great one, Dave. I think this is a massive lesson for a lot of people. I think it's going to save a lot of people time, a lot of people energy. Anything to leave the people with?
I think that's a good place to end it there. I think this is a good one. Yeah, I think this is a good place to end it.
Awesome. And me and Dave yesterday were talking about some of the podcasts we got in the pipeline. I'm excited for them. I'm excited for some guests that may be coming up. We'll mention a little bit later. Yeah, a lot of cool things to come, and I'm always excited to record these. So, uh, see you next week, Dave.
Yep. See you next week.